Go for liftoff in T-minus 30.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark.
All systems are a go. All systems are a go.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at will.
Hey, thanks for stopping by. Minnesota Black Robe Regiment Monday, TC and Friends Monday Night Musings. If you're a first timer because you're here for Cristi and I butcher her name, her last name, you can send your complaints to the complaint department when I get it established. I've told her I'm not going to try and say her name tonight because she told me it's pronounced Tyrone. And if you saw how it's spelled and you don't know her, you would think she was French, but it's not. So, and then she tried to tell me her maiden name, which it was even more confusing. So I'm just gonna call her CT because that's a lot easier on my old brain. But anyway, thanks for tuning in. This episode 4 of season 2. I'd like to say that we're going to have even more exciting guests on. I have a really interesting guest coming on next week, but I've been actually chomping at the bit to have Cristi on. I've been kind of, pressuring her in a very polite Twitter sphere kind of way since we met because Cristi is an authoress. I don't know what's politically correct. She's an authoress. She's an old-fashioned traditional kind of gal. And you know that by her stuff. This is her book. I won't tell you how I finagled a book out of her, but it is up here in a place of honor on my shelf. I'm not going to talk about the book. I haven't finished it yet. I'm going to admit that while she's not on, so that she decides she wants to just go ahead and cancel the show for the night. She can just ditch before she's on screen. But it's really interesting stuff because it's historical fiction and it's set pre-American War for Independence. And she has done so much. The flavor of the writing is indicative of so much research and a love for the Republic. And people can write period pieces. They can write historical fiction. They can write nonfiction history and be completely disconnected from the subject matter. Cristi's not that way. And it shows. And she's always doing research. And I think she's working on like 14 other books. And she homeschools her kids. And I think she raises like, 1,400 chickens or something. I don't know. She's got just this whole weird homestead, stay at home, hardworking mom. Works harder than a lot of people that I know. And she doesn't get paid for it. And, but anyway, if you guys are interested, coffee, merchandise, I'm working on merchandising. See, so you guys can see I've got my beanies up there and I got my coffee here. I got my mugs. If you're interested in my stuff, you can head over to mbrrpodcast at yahoo.com and let me know what you're interested in, or you can message me on Twitter, or if you know how to call me, you could call me and place an order. I'll take that as well. So finished my fundraiser for my friend Dana. She'll be getting the proceeds from that fundraiser that went on. And I'm looking for another one to do. And I think I have an idea of where we're going with that. So if you get an opportunity to check in on the different fundraisers I might be doing for special causes throughout the course of the season, throughout this year, feel free to message me once again on Twitter or on the podcast email, and I'll fill you in on what we're doing and why we're doing it. So without any, and by the way, head over to Subscribestar. It helps keep the electricity and the heat on in the studio, and it also helps pay the cable, which helps keeps the internet going. It's very hard to do a live stream without the internet, by the way. I just want everybody to be aware. When the next Chinese balloon comes over and releases an EMP over your house, you will not be live streaming or making phone calls, actually. So I will be doing future shows after the Chinese spy balloon EMP goes off. I will be doing all of my future shows via smoke signal. So, yeah. I'm loopy tonight, folks. You're gonna have to put up with it. This is why it's called TC and Friends Monday Night Musings, and Cristi is probably gonna say, please don't lump me into the category of friend after tonight. So, but yeah, head over to Subscribe Star, pick a level of support. I'd love to have you over there, and I promise I am working on exclusive content there. And I want to thank everybody that is on the Subscribe Star for being part of Subscribe Star. It means a lot to me. It does really, really, really help, especially after the battle I went through over the last couple of years. So without any further ado, I've wasted 6 minutes of her life. Cristi, thanks for doing this.
Well, thanks for having me.
What time do the kids start melting down and you have to go and rush off and put them to bed?
Actually, my daughter is at theater tonight, and then my son is at baseball, so they're off busy doing their things. Because you know how homeschool kids don't socialize at all, you know.
No, that's really funny. I just had that conversation with somebody today. You know, we home educated our kids from start to finish. I guess anytime you finish, you're finished. So that was stupid.
But hey, some people put their kids back in public school partway through, so I think that's a fair statement. Start to finish, you did all the way.
But they were still finished.
You're still finished, so
yeah, I was finished with. No, we did
through graduation.
Yes, through graduate. Well, now you can't even say that because now we have kindergarten graduation and first grade graduation, and I'm like, by the time the kid gets around to graduating from high school, he's had so many graduations, he doesn't know if it's even legit anymore.
Trophies for everybody all the time. My son just graduated our homeschool in December, so that was pretty cool. So we did the start to finish through graduation for one of them. So
you have
halfway there.
Senior? You have a senior?
Yeah, he's 18.
When did you start having children? When you were 12?
Well, 18 years ago. So yeah,
not saying. I'm just saying. But
well, thanks.
So you are in. I want to disclose your in-depth details, but you are in Arizona.
Yeah, I'm in Freedomville, Arizona. We're like in a super red county that never.
Just go ahead and tell everybody. Then I was just trying to protect you, but that's all right.
Hey, there's quite a few good counties in Arizona, so you have to pick and choose. And everybody's armed, so beware.
Yes, Cristi does have a Twitter. I thought I put her links in the description of the video, but maybe not. She is on Twitter. You go ahead and try and spell her name. Or just go to my... Well, Commonwealth is asking about it, so... He was my guest last week, so, you have big shoes to fill.
Oh, beware.
No pressure though.
I can do it.
So I want to get out of the gate. I want to talk just very briefly. You are also launching a podcast with with a co-host who is a local former candidate for office or is now in office or.
He ran for Congress here for my district. He didn't win. He came in third. But when he was campaigning, I just really dug his style. Like he actually knows the Constitution, which shouldn't be rare among candidates, but unfortunately it is very rare. And like he just really knows our history and stuff. So I was super attracted to his campaign and then wanted to help him with it. And so we became good friends. And then we just talked so much about our history and everything and kind of really related on that. And one day we were talking on the phone. We're like, hey, this is a great conversation. We should start a podcast. So we're working on that.
Well, and as I like to do is when you guys are ready to launch, before you launch, you let me know and we'll have you guys on to do a show promo for, what are you guys calling it?
Constitution Solution, one podcast under God.
It's got a little bit of a jingle to it.
Yeah,
And
because it's, we wanted to put the faith and in there too, because, as you know, Black Robe Regiment, America is actually built on the Holy Bible. And I think the reason that America is falling apart at the seams today is because of a lack of faith and knowledge combined. So we're hoping to maybe get some of that going again.
I would settle for people to just have some knowledge at this point. I
So
mean, it
start.
just I I'm absolutely shocked by. Well, if you watch, any of you who are watching, if you've watched any of the videos I put out subsequent to the interaction I had at the local university system campus 2 weeks, let's just call it 2.5 weeks ago now, the 21st of January, um, I was shocked at how hard it was to even like, it was like pulling teeth to get law enforcement students I was bumping into to understand. I'd do like, what's the chief law of the land?
Nobody knows anything anymore, huh?
Okay. What do you swear to uphold? Keep people safe? No. Who do you work for? So it's terrifying. And and I know it's probably terrifying, such a really strong word, but when you know the history of the U.S., when you know the history of the Republic, it's paramount for people to understand that. And I think especially for Christians, and this is where I get myself in trouble with a lot of Christians, is that you when you read in the scriptures, you look at what Paul says to the church in Rome, you look at what Peter said about submitting to authority. Um, it, you're dealing with even Christians having this mindset of, well, whoever's in charge is in charge, and we're supposed to submit to them, we're supposed to obey them. And it took me a long time to get out of that mindset. And the struggle now, and it's real, is to get Christians to just like wake up and see the historicity of the Christian faith in fighting against like oppression and tyranny. And I'm not talking social justice type, where you're oppressed just because someone said they didn't like your hair, or the your vernacular. I'm talking about like actual oppression. Like Minnesota's like on the brink of it right now. There's legislation being proposed that a bunch of people are going to go up to St. Paul, the capital, and try to convince the extreme left, which is pretty much anybody in the Democrat Party that's elected to office in Minnesota, this extreme left-wing agenda, to not pass this new homeschooling law that's going to require that homeschooling parents submit their curriculum to the school district
It's a
of
nightmare.
authority. And so you have to tell them what you're going to be teaching. You have to verify the number of hours that you teach every day. I guess they're, and I'm going off of, relayed information. I'm waiting to get my hands on the bill. And I'm like, how can they think of doing that? And yet there are so many Christians out there who would go, well, I guess they pass now that, my job is to fight it before it becomes law, when it's proposed legislation. And if I lose the fight, then I have to submit to it because it's the new law. And I'm like, no, you literally don't. And as someone in the chats, Dave Ebright, not if in conflict with God's word, for Christians especially, you're not required to submit to any authority if it's not the proper authority of the land. And here in the United States, as I know you will testify to, here in the U.S., the chief law of the land, earthly authority, is the Constitution, with we the people under the Constitution, and then under us are the elected and appointed servants. They're way underneath us, which is why you will never hear me refer to them as officials. They're not officials; they're servants, and they need to be reminded of that constantly. Where did you fall in love with that period, the period of history that you write about? Because you're working on books 2 and 3, right?
Yeah. Book 2 and 3 are mostly written. I'm kind of cleaning them up. So I really, when I started homeschooling my kids 7 years ago, and we started, once we started digging into American history, is when I fell in love with America. And just, I started learning things, what our country's based on, things they would never teach you in public school,
Right.
like that, no one told me that George Washington was a steadfast Christian. I was never aware that the Black Robe Regiment pastors led their men into battle. I didn't know that our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, all that stuff is built on the Bible. And so as I started uncovering these little known truths, I got really excited about it. I'm like, oh, this is cool. Because I always have been a kind of a rebel spirit, but figuring this out. So I always kind of like that part of our American history, but learning that our founders weren't just like these gutsy rebels. They were God-fearing men and women who were dedicated. They knew the Bible, and they knew the things like you're saying there, that sometimes in the Bible, there's multiple stories where people stand up against the authorities. Like in Exodus, when Pharaoh tells the midwives to kill all the Hebrew babies, and they don't, because they fear God before man, they said. And so they save the babies instead of killing them. I could go on. There's so many stories like that in the Bible where people, we follow God first. And as long as the law of the land, coincides with God's law, sure. But the second that it goes against it, it's our duty to stand up. We like I said, stand for the Lord first. So kind of that started building all kind of together as I studied our American history. And honestly, my faith in Jesus really strengthened. That's when I got saved during that whole era, because I always believed in Jesus, but I wasn't like super dedicated. And so I like to say that learning the American story for what it's really made of is a great way to light the path that leads to the gospel. It did for me. And so now I see that America and Christianity it works together. And you really, I believe George Washington even once said you kind of can't have America without Christianity. I can't remember his exact quote, but these guys knew that we needed our faith to make this work. John Adams said that the Constitution only works for moral and religious people. So that's what kind of learning all that and putting it together is what got me excited about it. And then, of course, I've already been a historical fiction author. I've done pirate stories before. And so I was like, oh, time to dig into this.
Are they good?
The 17th century Pirates of the Caribbean stuff, pretty fun stories. But this one, it's a whole new thing.
That was a horrible joke.
It's okay. The pirate jokes are generally pretty horrible. But I actually, my pirate heroes in my books, the characters in my revolutionary American Revolution books are the descendants of my pirate characters.
You didn't like make up fake background stories for actual people. You just used your own characters. That's a little derivative, isn't it?
It was my husband's idea. He's like, oh yeah, and then have him go across the West, and so we're just gonna follow our.
Well, now he's never gonna let you talk to me again after I made a joke about it being derivative. So
yeah, we're in it together, and he always helps me write the like the cutthroat scenes and stuff. So he's in for that part. I'm like, hey, what would you do in this part of battle? And
he says, well, if I had a saber.
Yeah.
So you fall in love with the history of the Republic, and as you're kind of walking alongside your kids as you're teaching this, and you're like, wow, there's some substance here. People need to know this, but nobody's going to go pick up a book from an unknown person writing as a historian in an official capacity. Maybe maybe people will want to hear, oh, great, now we got the chat started with pirate jokes. Guys, knock it off. All of you. You're all going in timeout. I'm serious. I'll put you all in timeout right now. I can do it for 5 minutes. Watch.
Overboard. Hang them from the yards.
Keel haul them, especially that Patrick Dennis guy. So you're saying like there's some things here that people could really learn, but they need to be able to read it. But most people aren't going to pick up a dry history book.
Yeah, that's kind of, well, that was my thing. That's what got me into history was historical fiction. And I mean, in school, I was the worst. I barely graduated. I didn't really want to learn anything when I was there. But the first book that caught my interest when I realized I liked reading was called The Mirror. And I can't remember the author, but it was like a time warp where the girl went back in the past. And I was like, oh, I learned all this stuff about the mining in the Old West. And it was like living in the era. And that's what started my love of reading and history combined. And I'm like, it's so fun because then you can learn about what life was like for people back then, but in a more engaging way where you're like living in it. You feel the emotions and the whirlwind of it all, instead of just like, here's the date and here's the event and here's the time and here's the name. That's boring. But history is way too exciting to be presented in a boring way.
Do you think that most people's aversion to history in general, but in particular that part of American history, has come down to kind of a social conflict, a societal conflict, a cultural conflict? Because who wants to learn about these stuffy old white guys with white wigs when they were all a bunch of racists? They were all a bunch of bigots and misogynists and patriarchy and all of that. And so we really don't want to learn it. Or do you think it comes down to maybe something even more, a little more innocent, along the lines of, well, that was then, this is now, things are different. We don't live like that anymore. And so therefore they don't bother? Or is it just we're too comfortable?
I don't think anything is innocent anymore. This is like a dark agenda that's out to destroy. I think, well, like when I was in school and they talked about history, first of all, public school was rotten from the beginning. It started with a whole dark agenda. It was never about education. But anyways, that's a whole other show.
That's a different episode, yeah.
Yeah. But so even when
Which
I was
I'm
in
working
school,
on one kind of like that. So thanks for stealing my thunder or giving.
hey, the more of us that know it, the better. So like when I was in school, it wasn't as obviously wicked, as it is now, but like history was boring when I was in school. I mean, that was the common thing. I hardly met anybody who was interested in history, and they were just made it a dud. And I feel like that was almost intentional. And then even like one of my kids' friends, when we lived in San Diego still, he was in, I always like to ask kids, what are you doing in history? And he was like, oh, we're learning boring stuff. I'm like, what about that? And he's like, oh, the Boston Tea Party. And I was like, what? Who makes that boring? So I told him the whole story and got him all excited about it. I'm like, this was.
Well, it's because all the guys heard the word tea party and they thought it was a bunch of little girls sitting around in a fake dining room.
Yeah, they didn't know they were going to get to like dress like Mohawk Indians and throw the tea overboard like daring rebels and destroy the king's industry and get chased down by British soldiers afterwards and all that stuff. That's way more fun. So
it's a tea party that ended up in a wild police chase. So
yeah, totally. You want your whole town shut down? Sister? That's how you get your whole town shut down. So I think, maybe
I don't know who this Dave Ebright is, but he's fanboying for you so hard.
Oh, he's my bud. He's one of my author friends. We beta read for each other, and there you are, Dave. Hey. And then I've formatted some of his books, and he's edited some of mine, and so he's a great author also. So I think it started by making it boring. That might have been intentional, and then it turned into destroying our history. Like they're literally out to destroy it and dismantle the heroes that made this country great. So first, if you think it's a dud, and then you think it's terrible, and if you really want to destroy something, you go after the founders. And so if you can just say that, like you said, they're just old white men with wigs on that own slaves, like nobody likes that. That's nothing to look forward to. That's nothing to be inspired by. But when you know the true story, it's invigorating. It's encouraging, and it makes you realize that like just regular people can stand up and make a difference. and those bad guys don't want you to know that.
Well, and the irony of it is too is that even the lower societal caste people were far more educated and literate and philosophical than probably pretty much everybody but the top 5% of people in our country now. And I think we have a
Absolutely.
tendency to look down our noses at people in the past and go, "Ugh, those Luddites, ugh, gosh, they didn't even have cell phones,
Yeah.
or they're so smart. Why didn't they have computers, And well, they didn't need them, and most of them spoke multiple languages. You can't even type in English, so
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Well, that's totally true. And I recently learned that because, I've been studying more of um, colonial education, which was home education for the most part. And the colonial America was one of the most literate societies of all time.
right,
And that's super cool. What an award that is to win. And it's because they read their Bibles. Families sat around the table and read their Bibles together, and the kids would copy work the verses and they talk about what it all meant. And it went from there. And so, I mean, the Bible is, among other things, a history book too. So talk about, keeping people interested in their history and where we come from. They were very aware of that. And the cycles of humanity, the sin, slavery, salvation, and you learn a lot about government in the Bible too, and how people rule themselves or put into captivity and how they get out, and God's hand in
yes.
all of that as it goes along. So the Bible is one of the most informative books of all time, and our founders knew it well, and it shows in our form of government that they put together.
Even the great deist himself, Thomas Jefferson, who did create and with an X-Acto knife and paste of some sort, did create his own version of the scriptures. But even he was well versed in scripture.
Oh, he was. And did you know that when that story, he actually was putting the gospel together in chronological order to share it with the natives?
That's part that you had that I didn't. But
Mhm.
there again, he was certainly far more of the watchmaker type person who saw God as detached to some degree from the world. Now, there again, some of it's spin, some of it's true, and you kind of have to dig into it and walk that path, and step on the right stones to be able to get through history correctly. Your goal in writing wasn't just to vent your gushing love for the Republic as it is now, but it was to educate. And there's this theme of the battle for liberty in the U.S. Obviously, I mean, liberty and death, touches on the plight of everyday colonials.
Yes.
And I'm not completely devoid of some knowledge of what I've got sitting on the shelf behind me. But how hard was the fight for the colonials who were the rebels to stir people up to action? Because I mean, you read stories and accounts of the Tories turning the rebels in left and right, all over and over and over again. But was it really that tough of a fight for the early revolutionaries? And I even hate using that word because it wasn't a revolution, but was it as hard as you do your research? Was it really as hard for them as we picture it, or maybe do we get it a little wrong to kind of almost sensationalize it? And was it a little easier because they were so far removed from Great Britain?
A little bit of all that, because there was a somewhat of a in the beginning. So the first book, the one you have there, the Fatal Stamp, is about the Stamp Act era in 1765. At that time, it's kind of when the rebellion really flared up, And the Stamp Act, which the king imposed after the French and Indian War to kind of cover the war debt, was a tax on every single piece of paper, which affected every single class of people. So that got everybody kind of united. It's really when the colonies started uniting. And there was a lot less of the Tory versus Patriot kind of stuff going on with the Stamp Act. There were some people that didn't mind it and were fine with it, but the majority seemed, from my research, to really not like it, and they kind of stood together to fight it. But of course, they proved it to be unenforceable, which is awesome. And so the king repealed it a year later. And there's a lot to be learned from the Stamp Act story. But then, we go on to all the different events. So that's 11 years before we declare independence. And I'm looking at each event, each big situation, and really digging into all the details. And every situation was different, because by the time we get to the occupation of Boston, pre-Boston Massacre, that incident, which I learned through a really great book that I read, Boston Massacre, A Family History by Serena Zabin is her name. And it really showed the Civil War, you could say, just like socially, because it wasn't a battlefield yet. But because when the troops came in to occupy the town to suppress the insurrection after the Liberty Affair, you can learn more about that in book 2. But a lot of people were like, hey, welcome troops. We're all one. We're all British. Like, here you are, like law and order. And then there was people, the Liberty Boys, the Sons of Liberty, that were like, we don't want you here. Like, get out of our town. Like, we don't need to be policed. We're not little babies. Like, we can handle our own. We've been on our own for all this time. And the king was so far away, and the parliament that was dishing out these laws was like, months away, one direction, right? So it was really kind of hard to police them for a long time. And then once they started to, it was like, it's kind of like moving out of your parents' house. What?
I was wondering if it'd be possible for us to pick up our parliament and move them months away one way.
Let's do it. I'm in. So that was different. But listen, each event was very different, because then, then we have the Gaspee affair, which is a little less known incident that I'm going to cover in book 3, which was a small group of rebels. You
just keep shilling. I'm perfect. And ladies and gentlemen, the links to where you can order her books or buy her books are in the description of this video. So make sure you're going down, and if you have a really pressing question that you would like to ask Cristi about anything, let's not make it too personal. But if there's anything you would like to ask her, you could super chat, and I'll make sure that I ask her that question. But if you try and ask a question without a super chat, you get time out for 5 minutes. Anyway.
So yeah, it varied from incident to incident, and I really have to try to not read too far ahead in my studies, because there's so much information. So I'm currently up to date through the Gaspee affair, which was in 1773. No, one? Okay, sorry, it's been a minute. 1773. So 72. Anyways, but what I really saw with the building up to the Boston Massacre was, like I said, the civil unrest between the people, and families even, were very torn apart. And I think that, at least when I look back on the American Revolution prior, you kind of picture it like Great Britain versus the colonists, but it was a civil war, and it was civil turmoil building up to. And even once we declared independence, it was not like, yeah, we're all in. It was hotly contested. And even the guys that were like into it and were there to sign the Declaration of Independence were not all in full agreement. And it was a really tough battle to get them to come to terms on that unanimous declaration.
Yeah, the Civil War aspect of it was actually more in between the like-minded individuals who were ready to fight the war for independence. Tom Woods covers this and some of his conversations. He is very detail oriented when it comes to defining the difference between a civil war and a revolution. And one of the things that absolutely, disgusts me is when Americans say, "Oh, we sparked the French Revolution." No, we didn't. We did not. The French Revolution had nothing to do with the American War for Independence. There is no similarity at all between what the French did and what the American colonies did at all. They're do not get in on that one, folks, because that was a secular humanist revolution, and even our Civil War doesn't even technically meet the definition of Civil War. We just label it because it sounds like the thing. Whenever there's a fight, in a nation over territory, it must be a civil war or a revolution. And the Americans weren't even really technically, the colonists weren't even technically, didn't even genuinely meet the definition of rebels, because they
Yeah.
declared sovereignty from Great Britain,
Yeah.
and
So it was a new nation.
it was a new nation like that.
Hmm.
It didn't become a new nation after the war. It was a new nation before the war even technically started. And so it wasn't civil, it wasn't a revolution, it wasn't a rebellion, it was a war to not establish, but to keep the independence of the states from British rule.
Yeah, that's a
And
really great point. And I think that something that is really important to remember when looking back on this time in history is that the American Revolution was a defensive war. It wasn't, it was like you said, it was maintaining our freedom. It was saying, leave us alone, don't tread on me, came from that era, right? It wasn't like, we're going to fight you, big king. We don't like you. Leave us alone. It was just like literally like, dude, leave us alone. Let us do our thing. And they would have just liked it to end there, but the king didn't want to let go. I mean, so, and then they came in, and we don't technically know who fired the first shot on the Lexington Green that day. And it was April 19th, 1775 when the first shot was fired. But we do know that the militiamen that stood up to the Brits that day on the lawn a lot of them were shot in the back while retreating. So even that day that the war officially began was in defense. So it's really important to remember that. I think when we want God on our side, which we do if we're going to win anything, is that it has to be a defensive war, and this was.
well, yeah, precisely. And that plays into, and this from your research, that the British in throughout history, the British Empire at the time, people kind of have this sanitized version of how the British fought war, and that they were very gentlemanly and they were very aristocratic, and that there were these rules of engagement and they wouldn't violate them. And the British were massively wicked to enemy combatants, and enemy combatants like families.
Yeah.
Because what people don't understand is back then your family followed the army a lot of times.
Yes.
The
women and children came with them.
The women and children came because they were the bread and butter that kept the army fighting most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were preparing meals, they were sewing clothing, they were making supplies and delivering supplies, and the British would ride in and they would slaughter entire camps. And they
burn
would
churches
burn churches.
Mm-hmm.
And their only rule of engagement was you never take out the officers first. That was it, because the officers wanted that rule because they didn't want to die, because they were aristocratic. They were, oftentimes within the, some form of royalty or landholders. And so they did have those rules in place for themselves, but they did not treat anybody else. And when you read accounts of the POW ships,
the ships were the worst.
The ships were the worst. People would die within days on these things.
Most of the soldiers or the American, guys that died during that war were on those prison ships. I think it was like 12,000 of them. More of them died in those prisons than in any land battle that took place.
Right. Precisely. And one of the things that I point out when people ask me, well, what's the Black Robe Regiment? And I'm like, how do you not know this? But then I forget where we live.
Yeah. It's
Uh,
the problem, the whole problem.
uh, that actually, the presence of, in what people don't understand is it wasn't just the preachers that really kind of got lumped into the idea of the Black Robe Regiment. It was all the Christians that followed all of these preachers who took commissions into the colonial army and the colonial navy. In fact, in the case of Muhlenberg, what was it? Within an hour after his final statement to his congregation, which was, "There's a time for peace and there's a time for war, and now is a time for us to fight." And he steps out from behind the pulpit. And this is a Lutheran, by the way, folks. Not that most people would recognize that in most Lutherans today, but he steps out from behind the pulpit, drops his robe, and underneath it is the uniform of a colonial army officer. And it was sword, and he grabs his musket and walks out. And within half an hour, 100 men of fighting age had walked out of that church and joined him. And
Awesome.
and that's why King George, his army hated the Black Robe Regiment, despised it, uh, not because they were horrible people to deal with, but because they were impossible to fight, because they were dogged in their determination, and they didn't stop. But they also fought with honor, and when somebody would surrender, they would take them in, and they treated them well.
Mhm.
And I don't know how much of it is true, but there are even stories that British regulars did not want to go back after being
I believe it.
imprisoned by the colonials, because they were like, we're treated better here than we are on the battle, by our own, battle regiments. And that's, of course, King George had to get in on the act, and started to call that war that damned Presbyterian War, because in his eyes it was guys like Edwards and Whitfield that had really, sparked it. And he wasn't wrong, but he's also has in the back of his mind, that he hasn't, the English had not forgotten John Knox and the turmoil that Knox brought to the British Empire, by stirring England up against the Queen of England, or Scotland up against the Queen of England, and what was happening
Wasn't that
Go ahead.
it's just so cool to see that, and so I think encouraging, and like so much can be learned to be learned from looking back on the Black Robe Regiment and how gutsy those pastors were. And Jonas Clark was the one that I've really looked into with the day Concord in Lexington. He was the reverend in Lexington there, and when they knew that the British troops were going to come through, that was after Paul Revere's midnight ride, when he went out to warn everybody that the regulars were coming. And he was like, led the militia out there, and he's like, we've trained for this day. This is the day that we've known this was coming, and here we stand, And it's sad today to see that so many of our American church has gotten so soft, because and then don't want to get
no offense,
involved.
but our American churches are incredibly effeminate.
Yeah, and it's sad knowing where we came from. But I guess that's when you look at a church like the early American church and how they stood up and led their men into battle and bolstered the courage in their men. I guess if you want to take down a Christian nation, you take down the church, right? And you tell them, don't get political. You don't want to upset. You might offend somebody in the pews. Someone might not want to come back or whatever. And it's so sad.
Well, that you're the historian in this, but everybody's heard the phrase "give them what for."
Yes,
and that it's not what for, it's Watts for. And that's a reference to, I think it was at the Battle of Lexington, wasn't it, where they were running low on wadding.
I think it was a later battle.
It might have been later. They were running low on wadding, and the muskets, the way they worked then, like you rammed the powder pack down, and you put a wad in, and then you put the round in, and you tamp that all in. Well, they were running low on wadding. The only way that those muskets would fire was to be packed tight with the wadding, which caused the pressure that expelled the musket ball. So the local Presbyterian pastor, if I remember, Presbyterian, or maybe it was
I can't remember his
Congregational.
name. I can't remember which one it was.
He like with wheelbarrows full of hymnals to the battlefield, and was ripping pages out of the hymnals and saying to them, because Watts was maybe the most prolific hymn writer of that era, and prior, he said, give him Watts 4, boys, give him Watts 4.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, he's packing the rifles, these muskets, with pages out of hymnals and handing it to these Christian boys to fire on their oppressors. And I got Christians today that look at me, say, like with what I had happened at the college here 2 weeks ago, and go, you have to be more respectful. I'm like, I wasn't shooting anybody. If that was me being disrespectful in your eyes, you have no idea just how tough Christians were. It's just absolutely amazing that, and I think you nailed it. The churches have become soft, and you nailed it. You know, you can't teach on political stuff, because every church I've ever tried to be affiliated with clings doggedly to their 501c3 status, which forbids them from being involved in political discussions as part of the official part of the church.
Well,
what are you going to do?
I think that it's important too to remember, and I know people debate about this, whether the American Revolution was biblically justified or not, and you have the whole turn the other cheek, talk and stuff. But knowing that, so these pastors that we're talking about, and how they stood up and led their men, like, this wasn't just like, I said, we're, get out of here, king, we don't want you here. This was years of abuse that they had put up with, and they had tried every other way to negotiate with the king, and they sent letters, and they like during the Stamp Act was the first time we had like a Congress got together where 9 of the colonies got together and wrote a letter to the king and said, hey, this is hurting us. This is hurting our businesses. So many times Ben Franklin was going across and talking to Parliament about it, and like, this is hurting our people. And they of course were very upset about the boycotts, because the American people were boycotting. Yep. They were like, okay, we just won't buy your tea, we just won't buy your stuff, we'll homespin our own wool, we don't need you, we will not be your slaves. Right. Which, once again, there's a lot to be learned from the Daughters of Liberty and their homespinning there. But so we tried every way possible, and the whole taxation without representation is a big deal, because we didn't have the communication to say what worked and what didn't for us. But the colonists themselves had been running their local governments as a republic, and they had their representative government, and they elected their legislators. And so they had a voice in their local areas. So it was really hard for them to deal with this faraway voice that was telling them, no, you can't live your life. And then they also, even before writing the Declaration of Independence, they wrote letters back and forth and stuff. So
they tried for years. It wasn't, and that's why I emphasize so much that it wasn't a revolution. It wasn't a civil war. It was literally a Declaration of Independence and a sovereign nation created when people came to their wits' end. They wanted nothing to do with violence. Absolutely. Nothing to do with the violence. It was the British that brought the violence.
They did. They brought it. And I think it's also very important to point out that multiple times the British soldiers tried to take our guns. They tried to take the powder from the colonists. That was in 1974 with the powder alarm, which was after the Boston Tea Party. When they came and tried to say, we're going to take all of the powder stores out of your powder house because we don't want you guys fighting us. And the militiamen stood up and guarded the powder house, and they had a little standoff, and the Brits backed down. Then that same day in Concord and Lexington, they were trying the British troops were coming through to do was to take the ammunition stores from Concord. And so, as we know from all of history, that anytime there's a horrible, wicked government, one of the first things they do before they kill everybody is take their self-defense away. And so they were trying to take away
Wait,
our
what?
livelihood. They were trying to take their self-defense away.
That's a thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine that.
Hmm.
So, yeah, they wanted the colonists defenseless. So they wanted to tax them into oblivion. They didn't want them to have any voice in their own ways of business and living, and they wanted to take away their self-defense. So, yeah, they put up with a whole lot before it got to this point. And so that's just always really important to remember when looking at the biblical defense of this situation.
Well, I think it's imperative for people to remember too that there were very godly men on both sides. Quite frankly,
Yes.
on both sides of the war, there were quite godly. But the problem with the godly men on the British side of the fight was that they weren't willing to say enough's enough. And the colonials were left with no choice. In fact, as they were, walking out of signing the declaration, it was, Franklin, and I'm paraphrasing, or not paraphrasing, but dramatizing, this idea of them all marching out together, and Franklin looking at them and saying, "Well, gentlemen, we shall all hang together, or we will all surely hang apart." And that was a reality for them.
Yes.
That was really truly a reality for them, that they would be hanged, and if they lost, yep, there would be no quarter given to anybody who was seen as part of leading this group of rebels. They would have all died, even though many of them were quite well respected amongst English society. They were. Washington was a well-respected officer in the British Army.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't always make good decisions, Fort Wilderness.
Yeah.
But war was a bloody thing, and many of them were very well respected. But
and
there
when you
would
were
have been
dealing
no
with
quarter.
Yeah, because you're dealing with a nation that already wanted to enslave you, and then now you've fought them back, and yeah, so there really was no turning back at that point. It was, well, join or die, right? Liberty or death. There was no turning back. One of the things too that
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Finish your thought.
One of the things that I hope to do in my stories, which starts in book 1 there, is to really show these events, obviously through my fictional characters who are just your everyday colonists. But I want to show a lot of these different kind of back and forth issues that you and I are talking about now through husband and wife, through my main characters. Because Avery, the guy, he is definitely like a son of liberty. He's like hardcore fighting everything. Don't take my freedom kind of guy. Don't tread on me. Where Clover, his wife, she's the one who's telling the story. I wanted to tell the woman's perspective of everything in this one. She's more mild mannered. She doesn't really want to do any of this. She just wants everybody to get along, and sometimes she kind of gets annoyed.
I'm looking for something that I read, and I don't mark up my books, and if you notice, I treat them I'm like, books are like sacred to me. I cannot stand dog earing. I don't like it when the spines get bent, and
I finally started writing in my books though. Like I was afraid to do it. Now I'm like,
I do it with I actually do it with historical, like history books, and I'll highlight the heck out of a Bible, but there's just something about, it's just weird. And there was something that one of the characters said. Oh, here it is. It was Mary Beth, and it's from. Really, you love. It's funny though. You will run into authors who go, "Oh, I hate that character. I wish she would have died."
Some of them,
I'm like,
so
why
much.
didn't you kill her then? So this is Mary Beth. She's replying to Fern, who says, Fern winced, So your losses granted the win, but you don't get the prize, and now you have to pay for it. And Mary Beth says, pretty much, she nodded. And the worst part is that we have no representation in Parliament. There's no official channel to express our opinions or address our complaints. They just tell us what, and we're supposed to accept it. That's not right, especially according to the Holy Bible, on which we built our local government. Jesus says, he who is chief among you, let him be your servant. We vote for our leaders here, and they serve our best interest. It's not that way with the king and his parliament. And the upset about it is it I'm trying to read on the fly. And his parliament, and the upset about it in the colonies goes beyond Massachusetts. In fact, Virginia recently sent a resolution to the king stating that people ought not be subject to taxes they've not consented to pay. Now, that sounds like a simple conversation, especially in historical fiction, where you're aiming at something. Like, no doubt you're aiming at something. But these were, when you read letters from that day, this is how people were talking. It wasn't just the guys. We talk. I've started a practice now where I go to my local bars in the evening. I'll have a drink, but I talk to people. I just talk to them. They're like, oh yeah, I got a podcast. Oh really? What's it about? Oh, funny that you'd ask. But so yeah, the men were in the taverns. They were in the bars. They were in, the closed print shops having these conversations. But the women were talking. And they were writing to each other.
Yes, the women of the time were have their part in it, and it's really fun. I learned so much of that through Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife. She's like my favorite. They were interested too, and they had their conversations and stuff about what was going on, but they did their part in the boycotts because they were the shoppers. They were the ones that were,
Right.
doing the gathering for the family. So when the boycotts picked up, they're like, okay, we got to trade with each other. We got to make our own stuff. They started homespinning the wool, which my daughter and I did a bunch of research on how you do that. So when I write it in book 2, it could be realistic. And so they started spinning their own clothes and putting everything together themselves. And then I guess there's notes too about any of the British soldiers that were there and stuff. They were kind of in awe with the participation of the women in America, the colonists that were not just watching from the window, but were actively engaged in standing up to this tyranny in their own ways in their households. And that's why it's fun telling the woman's perspective of this story.
And it was a fully embraced familial endeavor in most of these situations.
Yes.
For one, because when a father oftentimes went off to war, he may have had young children, but he also, more than likely, with the size of families back then, if he probably had a whole train of children, and many of them would have been considered military age, which back then was 12 or 13 years old. Mm-hmm. Now, the younger ones would be in the Fife and Bugle Corps, but were still expected to be on the battlefield, oftentimes in the front of the battlefield. Mm-hmm. And so when Dad went, oftentimes he took his sons. Mm-hmm. Very often took his sons. And so the women were invested in the success because it meant the life of their family.
Yes.
Because if you lost one, you probably were losing them all. Mm. And they knew full well, which is something that we don't, I mean, we're not even finished, but we're coming out of a 20+ year war here. And I have some good friends, Bob and Sue. Bob is retired special forces, Green Beret. Two of his children were born and raised and joined the military all through this war. That's unheard of in the history of the United States since World War II. Unheard of to have multi-generational families serving in the same conflict. There, it wasn't because it stretched out for 20 years. It was multi-generational because they were taking 12, 13, 14-year-old boys to the war with them.
Yeah.
I'm terrified of the idea of putting most of our 18-year-olds on the road with a car.
Different breed.
let
It's a
alone
different
with a
breed these
gun.
days. Yeah, it
And
was at age 6. It was at age 16 that boys could join the militia and start training on muster day with the men.
mhm.
And so, but sometimes the younger guys went, like you're saying, where they went, or they would even like just like stay around the wagon and get the supplies and do stuff in the
Yep.
background to make sure that everything was running.
And they were not treated any differently by the
Yeah,
British
they were.
when they were caught or captured.
Mhm. And then looking at the women on the home front, which is, it's funny because my
Did you
pirate
make notes
stories.
for the night? You made notes, didn't you?
No, I'm just winging it here.
Because I'm always checking like messages that are coming in over on the side of the screen and people that are messaging me on Twitter. Hey, I'm watching you, and I'm like, could you not comment in the chat? That'd be great. It'd be a lot easier. So I saw you look down. I thought maybe you were checking notes. But anyway,
No.
women on the home front.
So it's kind of funny for me because when I wrote my pirate stories, they're very action and adventure and daring, cutthroat, dangerous. But telling this story so far from the woman's perspective, and it'll get more dangerous as the series goes on, but it's almost like it's very mild for me from what I'm used to writing. But it's a different kind of danger, and
Intrigue.
it's the and the unknowing, especially once, because Avery, he's a sailor, and so he's gone a lot, and he will end up, spoiler alert, everybody, he'll end up kind of in the Navy or little continental Navy and swiping the British ships for supplies and stuff as the story goes on. But so while he's gone, she'll have no idea. There was no communication. You know, you might every now and then be able to send a letter by land, but when they're out at sea, they're gone. And so she won't know. And she'll just have to take care of her children and you know, keep the home fires burning and make sure everybody's fed and that the garden's growing and
in the
all
crops
these different things.
and crops, and like not just gardens, but if they were farmers, it was on mom and the girls oftentimes to go out and tend to the crops. And it was
and just the daily life. I have a book that I've been looking at colonial women, and it just kind of goes through the different types of the areas and eras of colonial women and how they lived. And I mean, just the daily life before the war was rough. You know, you got to get up and get the eggs and get the goat milk and start the fire, and you got to be over the fire all the time, and then you got to raise the bread, and then your kids are crying, and you got to wash your everything by hand, and you know what I mean, just life before electricity was hard. And then
I washed 3 loads of dishes in the dishwasher yesterday. So
oh, my dishwasher's broken. Don't remind me. I gotta hand wash like the old days again.
I never. Well, don't try and put them in the washing machine. By the way, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Darn. But so eventually,
it's a different problem you end up fixing.
Yeah. So I definitely eventually want to write this series from Avery's perspective, and so to tell the guy's story also afterwards, because you know, like different things that happen that she hears about that he's engaged in, and the smuggling, you know, and all that went on. We'll get to see the action and adventure and danger firsthand from his series when I get there. But
And the
this,
women,
for now, this is.
And the women spied.
Yes.
Yeah,
and
there were even a few within the Culper spy ring, which is one of my favorites.
355.
Go ahead, explain.
Oh.
355. You can't throw. Everybody's out there going, no, it's not. It's only 833. What are you talking about?
It was like it was her secret spy name was 355. I think they know she was a female spy, but no one really kind of knows who she is. But there's all this mystery around her. I actually read a historical fiction about her by Veronica Rossi called Rebel Spy. It was so fun. It was such a great story. But like I said, she's a mystery. We don't really know, but she definitely did some great things. Whoever she was, she helped us win the war.
Yeah, and there's so much, you know, like you said, with keeping the home fires burning and on the home front, and there was also a reality too where oftentimes these women who were married to guys that were off fighting in the war were also intermixing with British loyalists, and having to play it very close to the vest that their husbands and their sons were part of the colonial military, and trying to explain why they weren't there and, you know, what had happened. And and so when a city would be overrun by the British, like they had a very tough decision to make in a very short period of time. If you're a loyalist, you're fine. If you're a colonial, you
They'll
may
burn
need
your
to
house
leave.
down.
Yeah, they'll burn your house down.
Yeah.
And so you might need to leave town. And oftentimes it was, households, and they weren't leaving behind their household servants, and yes, it was a slavery issue. And some of them were also indentured servants. They traveled with them, and they took what they could carry and run to stay ahead of the British military. And those that couldn't get out oftentimes were living a life of captivity
In
um,
their own homes.
in their own homes. Yeah,
Mhm.
where they were having to pretend to be perfectly okay with everything that was happening with the British occupation of their town or their city, all the while
Which
knowing
is
that
why
their loved ones were out probably dying to free them.
Mhm. Which is why we have the Third Amendment in our Bill of Rights. We don't have to house troops.
Well, yeah,
um,
but that's just ridiculous. The United States would never do that ever again, Christine. I can't
mm,
believe you
they
would
would never
ever.
breach our Bill of Rights.
They would
um,
never. They would never take your property from you without any just cause. They would never violate your First Amendment rights. And so all of these amendments are just stupid. I don't know why we have to have them.
well, and that's what's crazy too, is I'm writing this series because I'm seeing all these breaches to what later becomes our Bill of Rights and why our founders put them, enshrined them in that bill. And you're like, oh, they could just search all your stuff, and just go through all your things. So now that's why we have the Fourth Amendment. We have all these things, but and it's it's super sad. I get writing it now in this era that we live in, because I'd want to be like, wow, this is why we have this, and now it's so great because of everything these guys gave up for us then. But instead, it's like you just said, where it's like, oh, well, no one cares about that anymore. So
Well,
it's
what
really
what
sad.
people need to, and we've all talked about this, those of us that are patriotic, those of us that are, for resisting tyranny, we've all said it. The First Amendment is the start. The Second Amendment is there to back up the first. And
Ooh, I heard someone say the other day that the First Amendment is the lion and the second is the teeth and fangs. I was like, ooh, I like that.
oh, yeah, I like that too. I have to remember that. But
Yeah.
what what we don't understand is that these were these natural rights, these or negative rights. We'll have a conversation sometime, I suppose, about what a negative right is. But these natural rights, uh, the founders didn't like just sit down with the Constitution and then come to the Bill of Rights and go, well, I guess we got to come up with something. Boy, I mean, something's got to make us different than the British and everybody else. These things were on their mind the entire time because they were watching these abuses happen,
Mhm.
and and some of it was happening prior to the war. Some of it happened in the midst of the war, and they're like, we're never going to allow this to happen again. And
Man.
and that's how they end up in there. So they fight this fight. And there again, it's a deeply familial way, and include these things because of their love for the nation that they launched and wanting to keep it that way. And here we sit 200 and some years removed from all of that, having forgotten these family sacrifices, forgotten the sacrifices of these people. And we have people that look at the Constitution, look at the Bill of Rights, and they go, they couldn't possibly have foreseen all our needs today. How do you
It's
respond to that?
timeless. It's timeless stuff. These are God-given rights that are enshrined in here. And it's not that, oh, our Constitution grants us these rights. It's that these rights have always been there from the Garden of Eden when God made us. This is our natural rights. And so it's really crazy to me that people, one, don't regard what our founders put together. A lot of them don't even know it. But even there's some that say it's outdated and it should change with the times and all that stuff. And I'm like, do you even know? They don't know what they're saying, because for what? what would we exchange this for? If this is all outdated, old news, a bunch of old white guys wrote it, what are we going to do instead? What's better? Our Constitution is the longest lasting currently living Constitution, and there's a reason for that. And it's because it's based on the Bible, and it's based on timeless principles.
I thought you were going
And
to say
so,
because it's enclosed behind bulletproof glass in a vacuum sealed chamber in the Hall of Congress. Or
I'm
the
sure
Library
that
of Congress.
helps.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure that helps. But
You're going to
if
never
it
come
was,
on my show again.
I think it's great. But the thing is, it doesn't matter if they blow it up tomorrow and that beautiful parchment gets, lost into the winds of time. It doesn't matter because our rights come from God and they are eternal. They live with us. As long as we live on this earth, we have those rights. And so it's up to us to know them so that we can defend them, because a lot of people don't even know what they are or why they exist. And how can you expect anybody to stand up? That's why I say, looking at where we're at now and the mess that we're in and everything that our founders stood up for back then, they were coming off of 150 years of Christian nation building. We are currently on 100 years of national decline. We are not the same. There are some people out there, like you're doing a good job there, standing up for your freedoms and trying to get others to do the same. My family's doing that here. Of course, there's a good number of us across the country doing this, but the majority is kind of just like not doing anything. And just it's really hard to get people in gear when the comfort.
The heck you say. I can't possibly imagine. Well, I had this conversation with a young lady who's homeschooling her kids now, and she's going to be heading up to the Capitol tomorrow. And I asked her about the legislation, and I said, "Why do you care?"
Mm-hmm.
Well, but they're infringing on us, and I don't want to downplay how important it is to her, because I know how important it is to her, and I'm glad she's motivated to do something. I said, "Why do you care if the school district if the state wants the school district to see your curriculum? Why do you care if they want to see your test?" I said, "Part of you should embrace the idea of them seeing your test scores, because your test scores are probably on a bad day are going to be better than the average test score of the local school district."
Yeah.
I said, but ultimately the issue is that they're using things like this to pit you against the other side. And so the Republicans step in and they're like, "Look at what these horrible Democrats are doing. They're trying to infringe on your freedoms and liberties to choose what's best for your own children. You need to come up and fight this," because it's a money-making thing for them. If they can keep losing but keep you fired up, you keep giving them money so they can keep campaigning against how evil the other side is. And the other side wants to take everything from you. And so you agree that that's evil. I said, what you really need to do is you need to look at all these legislators that are telling you, "We need you to come testify. We need you to talk." You need to tell them to disband I'll just use a phrase across the board in the United States. Your state's Department of Education needs to go away. And until you can get a allegedly conservative member of your party to actually back legislation to disbar or disband the Department of Education in your state or at the federal state level, then they don't really give a damn about you and your kids and how they're educated. They're just using you. And I said, and I love that you're fired up, and go testify. But understand that this legislation is passing, that you could have 50,000 homeschool families show up at the Capitol in St. Paul on Tuesday, and they're still going to pass this legislation, and it's going to get signed into law by the governor. Then, after it is, you say no.
Yes, that's my favorite.
Say no.
You say no. Yes, that's all we need to do to everything.
And I said, and you'd build a network of people across the state that if somebody in Western Minnesota gets a phone call from the local school district that the superintendent and some para-education type, they're going to come to your house because you haven't turned in your paperwork, and they're going to inspect your stuff, and they're coming tomorrow at 1:00 in the afternoon, They send out an email, or they send out a message on Signal, or they send out a bunch of text messages, or they make a couple of phone calls, and you get that chain going. And as many people that can be there the next day at 1 o'clock show up, and they surround the house, and that superintendent and that paraeducational person or whoever don't come on that property.
Don't tread on me.
You all show up and you protect this family. And if they come with
Yes.
the sheriff, you make the sheriff arrest you. You have to be willing. And that's what we have to do. That we
Yes.
have to be willing to take the hit. And I'm not talking about, violence. I'm talking about being willing. We cannot any longer go and fight against legislation, and then when it passes, resign ourselves to following the legislation that's passed.
Yeah.
We can't.
I'm with you.
We
I'm with you
we
on
have
that.
to we have to get to the point where if the legislation is proposed and it passes and we despise it, say we're not honoring that. We're
Well,
not
and
going
then
to
really
honor that.
that whole situation is a total breach of the Fourth Amendment, right? Because that protects our papers. So they can't get your papers. Well, if you willingly hand them over, sure. But they
But
can't,
if
they
you're
need a
told that the law
warrant.
says you have to present this to the school
Yeah.
district and you go, "Oh, well, the law says," then
Oh, they said. Yeah, that's ridiculous. I totally support your idea. I want to see a lot more of that happening as things get more ridiculous. And that's kind of what we're working on in our county here. And I want to really just see, because we have a terrible governor now in Arizona, and she's going to try to do a lot of really ridiculous things. And people get all freaked out. They're like, oh, the governor's going to do this and this and that. And I'm like, she can't. She's the executor. The executor can't write law. And the only way that something in executive branch goes into effect as if it's law, which most of these COVID measures were mandates and executive, things.
orders, yep.
Yeah, we just say no. That's my favorite answer to everything. It's just no. Become ungovernable. And that's what the Stamp Act is about. And what is so cool about it is that through mostly peaceful measures, they got a little rowdy a few times. The colonists just made it unenforceable. It became ridiculous because the king, no one would distribute the tax, the stamps. They wouldn't even bring the papers ashore. They kept the ships out in the harbor, so they couldn't even bring them in. It just became this whole thing where it was like, this just doesn't work. We can't enforce this. And so it would be so easy if they say, hey, close your businesses, if we just don't. I know you have friends that have dealt with that. Just don't. I like that guy in New Jersey that they tried to close his gym, so he just took his doors off so they couldn't close the doors, and like things like that. And especially if you get a whole town that does that together, and you just keep going on in your daily lives peaceably and just living and shopping and buying and face free. Don't ever put the mask on your face, and you can just make it unenforceable peacefully. And that's part of the beauty of being in America and being an American. No matter what they try to dismantle, we still have the path to do that. And I really hope to see more people putting that no into effect in the coming days.
Where do you see yourself going? And once again, I would love to have you and your co-host on for to launch when you guys are ready to launch the podcast. But where do you see yourself going with the writing after you finish up this series? Do you see yourself kind of looking into the War of Northern Aggression? I mean,
we relate on that one. I don't know. I'm honestly not that interested in the War of Northern Aggression.
I find that intriguing because to me, it was the dissolution of the Republic, which is so embedded in everything that you're writing with your series right now.
And maybe looking at it that way, because I remember when I was reading about that war when I was younger, I just was like, oh, it's so awful and so bloody and brother against brother, and I just was totally like there was no glory and honor in it. And they tell you it's about slavery, but it wasn't. And then in homeschool, we read a lot about Robert E. Lee, and he's like a really cool dude, he didn't own slaves, and the more we learned about him and seeing the other side of things, I'm like,
Stonewall Jackson.
I haven't studied about him yet. But But it's like, and I have a friend who
Everyone loves Stonewall. Everyone.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Um,
I shouldn't say
a friend of
everyone.
mine, his
Someone did
grandfather,
kill him,
great grandfather, his great grandfather fought in the wars. Someone down at the line of his family and fought it for the South and the Confederacy, and he didn't own slaves. But he's like, they're coming in and destroying his property. Now, regardless of, we could go on about the details there, but in the end, what was the outcome? The outcome was federal overreach. The outcome was amending the Constitution, 4 times in 1 decade? Like, I don't like, like we were saying earlier, when our messages, I refer to myself as a original constitutionalist. I believe that the beginning of it was, God ordained. It was a lot of prayer and dedication that went into it. The Bill of Rights, though those are amendments, that was part of the package deal. It was part of the agreement. They're like, okay, the guys that doubted it, the anti-federalists were like, okay, we're a little weary about going, creating this federal government, but if we can agree to do these protections for the people afterwards, we'll sign on. So, but then everything after that, don't get me started on the other amendments.
Well, but even look at, and this is why I was a little intrigued by you saying you don't know if you really want to cover the American Civil War, if you will. Because if you look at how the 14th Amendment was even ratified and what was done to the southern states that refused to ratify it, they were occupied by federal troops, forced. Yeah. And the longer they said no, the more they were stripped of all of them, like all the people. The federal troops went in and removed legislators and removed representatives and arrested people and occupied these states until they eventually were beat down and to the point where they agreed to ratify the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, I mean, the 14th Amendment is so long too. I'm like, it's so long. It's like, this when we started just like bloviating our opinions on paper. Like the original Bill of Rights is so simple, so straightforward.
Oh,
also,
yeah,
the 13th Amendment is kind of, everyone's like, oh, that's the one that freed the slaves. And I'm like, have you read within the commas? Within the commas, it says, unless duly convicted for a crime. That's been used against people ever since. Because if you have a corrupt justice system that considers waving your American flag in your yard a hate crime because it's a hate symbol, then they could enslave you again, So the 13th Amendment is not my favorite either.
I won't ask you about the 19th then.
Don't get me started. I'll lose all my fans. We got to work ourselves into that. Yeah, all of it afterwards. But
you would be surprised the number of times I bring that up, and it's the guys that attack me, and it's the women going, yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
I'm just like, I don't need the 19th. I don't need, if my husband was going to vote for our family, I trust him. He's great. We talk about everything. Like I mean,
he married you, so everything's got to be okay. So
it's pretty good. I make him homemade bread. He likes that. But so there was a really strong argument from women that didn't want the 19th Amendment. Most American women didn't want it. They were like, hey, we trust our husbands. We don't want to do jury duty. We want to get mucked up in the political mire. And one of my favorite arguments.
Oh, and they were pulling the political strings at home anyway. It was,
right?
You're not really going to vote for that guy, are you?
Yeah,
seriously?
Come on.
I'm not making bread for 2 weeks.
Right? Yeah, but then as long as, there's women out there voting contrary to my beliefs, I'm going to go cancel them out,
And that's one of my other friends. It's one of my other friends has said, like, I'm going to keep using it because at least I can cancel out the vote of an idiot somewhere.
The screeching, women that love it. Yeah, I'm definitely go ahead.
No, so your next series is going to be about COVID.
You know what? I have a dystopia kind of fantasy novel that I started a while back.
I have just a dystopian fantasy. So
I have so many books in my head. I wish I could write as fast as I dream. And I started that story before COVID in my mind, but then after all that, I was like, oh, we could do the math and the freaky health stuff, and everything wanting to be pure and clean, and I can have all kinds of fun with. So I think I'm going to tell that story through this kind of fantasy world, but use all the features of this modern medical tyranny that we're experiencing.
Oh, people, you guys have been tuning in for this entire time and not one of you has hit the like button. I am drastically disappointed.
Nobody likes us.
Well, it's probably me they don't like, because I've also gained 1 subscriber and then lost 3 since we've been talking.
Man.
So, and I'm not blaming you. It happens to me every time I do a stream. So it's like I almost gain more subscribers when I don't put out content. If we subscribe, will you stop putting out content? Okay.
They're like, this sounds great. Oh wait, no, he's too dangerous. But yeah, it is something to see in our current state of things, where even the conservative parties...
Oh nope, there's 10 likes there now. Somebody did their job. Yeah.
All right. But yeah, we're even the conservative party, the one that's supposed to be about limited government and all that stuff. They're all so like communist. Everybody, it's like the whole communist ideas are so rooted into our society now that people react from that pace, and they don't even realize the detriment of these things that are going on.
What was I gonna ask directly? I was gonna try and... So how long do you see this series ending up being for you?
I'm imagining at least 7 books, because as I dig into each element, I'm like, there's so much. Oh, there's so much.
And you are going to actually be writing one about the cult perspiring, if I remember you saying.
Include that in there, yeah, because one of Avery's brothers is going to kind of end up a part of that, and all my little friends are going to go different ways and do different parts of the things.
Do you foresee having a strong British character that has a recurring role throughout this, that isn't just this really evil like trope of a bad guy?
You know what? There's a guy, now that you're saying that, there's a guy in book 2 that maybe I could do something with. Well, because I want to really show...
I'm not trying to dictate to you what to do. I was just asking, because
I take
that's
ideas.
the cliche. That's the cliche thing that you do with a movie or a play or a book series, is that your bad guy, especially with historical fiction, is always like all the tropes of that particular that bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I've always wished that authors could capture, especially writers could capture, screenplay writers, whatever, is that both sides saw themselves as the good guys.
Yes. Well, and I think with this one, Clover, my female lead, I think through her we see a lot of that, because she sees the world that way. She sees the good in people, and so she's like there's the one, thank you, the one British soldier that is guarding the road sentry near them, and they get along, and he's pretty nice, he's not a creep, and it's, he loves his family and stuff. So while she's talking to him, sorry, I'm trying to plug my thing in here.
I won't keep you much longer. So.
But yeah, so through her we see the other side. Like my daughter is my I read with her as I'm writing. I read to her, and she gives me ideas and stuff. She's 13, and so we were just reading in book 2 what I have, and she's like, "Wow, you really see the other side, like the soldiers, their lives, what matter to them. Like they're not just these monsters that were out to take over Boston.
Right?
They're guys doing their jobs,
Absolutely.
And so, which makes it all the more interesting and heart-wrenching, and a lot of them too were cousins and families of the people that were in Boston. So it's like literally a family reunion, like that book I read. So there's a lot more to it than the good guys and the bad guys, and I think that makes a more interesting read.
I'm very irritated right now, because I put the links, all your links, in to the description of the video, and for some reason they didn't show up. So now I'm adding them in. So you keep talking. Blow V8.
Okay.
Just go ahead and blow V8.
Oh, I can do that. I'm good at that. So I'll talk.
I'm a great bloviator.
I know. I'm like, I could talk forever. It's like I've always daydreamed about having a podcast, and now that I'm doing one with Mark, I'm like, oh, this is like my thing. I could do this all day. So I'll just talk a little bit more about book one there that hopefully everybody wants to read and can't get enough of, and then they want all of them afterwards. Like I said, with my characters, I really like showing the different aspects of things and the different events that they go through. It's so fun when I read like, okay, this happened, like the Stamp Act Congress, this happened at this date, and this is where it happened at. And then I'm like, okay, so where can I put my people in the scene? Who gets that news? Who sees them walk by? Who, and so it's like putting this puzzle together and all these pieces going into place around the fiction, the facts, putting my fictional people in the facts. And then when the real people, the real characters show up, it's funny. I'm always nervous about that because I'm like, I don't want to take a real life, historical figure and mess something up or say something wrong. And so I'm always really careful about how I portray the real characters, which there's mentions of them in book one. We'll start seeing more of them in the next books. Like in book two, we have the Boston Massacre and then the John Adams trial when he defends he's the lawyer for the British soldiers. And that's really fun because Avery's on one side and Clover's on the other side. So even in their home, they're like kind of arguing about who's right and who's wrong, And so, yeah, I just really hope that my imaginary friends can get everybody excited about what happened and what we went through and see what the everyday men and women went through and what they gave up to give us what we have today.
What's one takeaway from your research that you think has been formative to your personal philosophy, and what would you say to compel people to take away from your books?
I think that seeing, the whole biblical take that there's nothing new under the sun, and seeing that as all these things happen and these events unfolded, and they're happening now, the same type of tyranny is affecting us today, and that the people that stood up then for their rights and risked everything, their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor, as the Declaration says, to give us all the freedom that protected the freedom that we've had for so long in this country. It's there. There's a roadmap. This is not an unbeatable situation. We could just do what they did and make it happen, but that doesn't come without risk. And so we have to be willing to take the risks, and we have to be willing to lose friends and things and jobs and money. But with all that, I know that going back to where we started, if we follow God first and seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and all else will be handed to you, that things will work out. And for us and our families, and I don't know where things are going to go. Some people talk about this being the end times, but I know that Jesus says he's coming like a thief in the night. So I'm not going to sit around and wait for him to show up. I'm going to, what do they say? Occupy till he comes and do the work till that day. And so,
well, I'm all millennial, so I'm throwing words at you again.
I don't know that term. You always teach me new words.
And just so everybody's watching, none of them are the words that you don't want to use in front of your mom. Well, depending on where your mom is on things, you may not want to tell your mom you're amillennial. Or I could really string together a whole phrase of just obscure theological titles, and you'd be like, thanks a lot. Now I got to dig into all of that. So
yeah, you give me things to research. I'm like, I got to learn about that now. I just think no matter what's coming down the pike, that our work doesn't change. We have to do the same. We have to share the gospel. We have to encourage hope and, faith and knowledge and courage are the things that we need to get our friends and family back into those things. And that spreads like a little wildfire, and little by little,
what would you say to, I'm sorry, I shouldn't cut you off, but
that's okay.
What would you say to the atheist that picks up your book and says, "Look, hey, this is a great book. I really appreciate your take on Christianity, but I'm not there. But I'll stand side by side with you in this fight." Is there room for them there?
Actually, yeah, totally. Actually, one of my beta readers, one of my friends, he doesn't believe in anything, and so he read
He
it.
doesn't believe in anything, so I don't even know if his
Anything.
opinion on my books is even any good.
No, I love him. He's great. He's so helpful with the history and all this other stuff. And in the end, he was like, yeah, he enjoyed the story. It was great, and he knows that no matter what he believes in, he knows that America was built on these things. So, he agrees that you can't really tell the story without that part of it. And so I think that's really cool that even though we don't agree on our faith, but we understand the story the same and the significance of that. And so I would hope that anybody that maybe they're not a believer, but this is a fact. This is America's built on the Bible. You don't have to like that, but that's true. And I always, of course, hope that anybody that doesn't like that, or but maybe they could, see why it's so good. I like to say that if you like America, you're gonna love Jesus, because we wouldn't have America without him. So it's always my hope is that someone would get interested and maybe come on into the faith. But in the meantime, it seems like according to my friend there, that you can enjoy the story anyways. So hopefully everyone will.
No, and I hope that I put the link in the live chat, and I got it obviously up there, and I did put it in the description of the video. I would. So here's a little challenge for my viewers. If you would like to support Cristi by buying her book directly from her, and you send me a copy of the receipt, or no, you send me a picture of you holding a copy of the book when it arrives. Send me a picture of you, doesn't have to be on like a live social media. You can send it to me in Twitter Messenger or DM. You can send it to me in a email, mbrrpodcast@yahoo.com. If you send me a picture holding one of Cristi's books that you have bought directly from her, and I would prefer to see you go to her website to buy it, because you do sell through Amazon as well, correct? No, you don't.
No, I
No,
do.
you don't. No, you don't. Only on
It's
your
hard to
website.
buy for me. I do everything the hard way because
No,
I boycott everything.
no, but
So
that's perfect. You go to her website and you buy a copy of her book. I will give you $5 credit towards anything in my merchandise catalog. But you have to buy one copy of the book from Cristi. Even if you're going to give it to somebody else to read, I want to see you holding it, and I will give you a $5 credit. So
thanks.
So you might get two buyers.
Woo!
Or you're going to lose all your sales. People are like, "Oh, he's endorsing her." Oh.
Oh no, they want refunds.
I decided I'm going to start endorsing all the Democrat candidates, because every time I say, "Hey, I'm really like this person," they lose. So
Yeah. There you go. I'm starting to feel the same.
But no, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate what you're doing. I wish more people would take the time to get to know the history of our country, and Sarah gets good books and good coffee. Sounds incredible.
All the best things.
Cristi might know what my coffee tastes like, but she has a weird way of using it. So
it was super good anyways, like normal people coffee, but I also sprinkled I got the grains and I sprinkled them on my ice cream, and it was so good. So I highly recommend it.
And I asked her, "You do that often?" She goes, "No, that's the first time." I'm like,
it was delicious.
How do you get a bag of coffee from some stranger and you look at it and go, you know what this needs? Ice cream.
Needs ice cream.
It needs. It is good though.
Yeah, I'm gonna need to get another bag.
But yeah, I will. I'll abide by that. Buy a copy of one of Cristi's books. Send me a picture, and I will give you $5 credit toward anything in my merchandise. Well, not my books here. You don't get those two. So, Those are mine. She goes, "Be careful, TC." my friend Kevin says, "Be careful, TC. You have nearly 2,400 subscribers. That's $12,000." Well, yeah, but imagine how much merchandise I'm selling if I get
Yeah,
if 2,400 people buy her books. I will take
that's
that
a
hit.
win-win.
I will take that. I will take 20. I will take 12,000. I will take a $12,000 hit because that means I'm making more than $12,000, and that would go a long ways to making TC much more comfortable than he has been for the last year and a half. So, um, tell everybody, even though I already put it up there, where they can find you, social media, and where they can interact with you, and where they can find your stuff.
All right, I'm on Gab, Truth, and Twitter now. I'll be at Faithful and Fearless on Gab and Twitter. On I'm sorry, on Gab and Truth. And then on Twitter, it's at Cristi Taijeron. You got to spell it. Faithful and Fearless was too long to put on there. And then my website is faithfulandfearlessbooks.com, where you'll find my books and links to all the websites. So that'll make it easier and you don't have to spell my name. So go to faithfulandfearlessbooks.com. You can see my books and the descriptions and some of the reviews and what I'm working on and what's coming next. So that's where you can find me.
Well, I'm looking forward to your next books coming out, and I'm looking forward to you and your friend launching your podcast. And like I said, I'd love to have you guys come on and talk about it and introduce the audience to the show when you guys are ready to announce officially. And thanks for your time. Thanks for being a solid historian who likes to make it interesting.
Well, thanks for having me. It was some really great conversation. I totally enjoyed the time.
Well, I did
Keep
too.
up the good work fighting for freedom.
Is that what I'm doing?
You're doing a good job.
It feels like a losing
call
battle.
it?
It feels like a losing battle most days.
No,
You ever give advice? You ever feel like you're
giving
giving advice to people when they ask for it and then they don't take it and then they come to you and blame you because they didn't take your advice? That's how I feel. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I have been telling you. You haven't been listening to me. That's
all this time when the conspiracy theories come true.
I'm out. Do you have any I can borrow?
I'm out. They all came true. But hey, tomorrow's a new day. We'll see.
Chinese balloons everywhere for everyone. So, Cristi, you go. Get out of here, and I'll close up.
All right.
Thank
have
you
a good
so
night.
much for your
God
time.
bless.
You have a great night. God bless. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Cristi Taijeron. I got it right. But it's not spelled that way. I feel like if you haven't seen it yet, you need to go watch the Key and Peele skit Substitute Teacher to know why I love picking on the way people spell their names and how they're pronounced. Aaron. Yeah. Sarah, stop that. You're gonna make me blush. Once again, folks, if you go to Cristi and you order a book and you send me a picture of you holding the book, I will give you $5 credit towards merchandise in my store. And I would love for people to head over to Subscribestar if you haven't yet. It's really easy to find Subscribestar. You just type in Minnesota Black Robe Regiment podcast, and I'll pop up. And it is a liberty-loving, conservative, friendly, libertarian-friendly platform. They are just not about censoring. They're not about taking people down. They're not about canceling people. And it's absolutely a wonderful tool for people like me who are, we are trying to fight. And I really appreciate what Cristi was saying. No, you know what, folks, we all have those where we wonder if we're making an impact. And and I don't know about Cristi if she ever feels that way, but I'm telling you that if you can plug people into these books that she's working on, especially starting with her first one, you will you will see people come alive because it personalizes the story of what took place in the colonies prior to the war beginning. And it's a really important conversation that we should be having. And And then find your own way of sparking these conversations. Like I said recently, I've taken to showing up at the local taverns, the local pubs, sitting down, having a drink, and just having a conversation with the person sitting next to me. That's how we made the progress that we did. That's how we turned 3% of the colonials into a fighting force that beat the most powerful army that had existed on the face of the earth up until that time. And then we turned around and became imperialist conquerors ourselves. So let's not go that far, but let's have these conversations with people. Be the 3%, not the weird radical LARPing wannabe militia folks that don't have any military experience and dress up in camouflage clothing and think they're doing military maneuvers on the weekends with paintball guns. But be the 3%. Go out, have these conversations, awaken people, plug them into the reality that they are being oppressed. And as I've been telling conservatives and traditionalists for a long time now, stop supporting the people that are going to be the ones that are going to come and oppress you. I told this to a gentleman the other day, a man that I have respect for, who took after me because I've been holding police accountable. And I said, you are backing the tool of your own oppression. And the only way that we change that is to start having conversations with law enforcement, reminding them who they work for and reminding them that their first duty is to defend and uphold the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the liberties of the people that they work for. Now, also, we need to have those conversations with your average Joe in the small town that you go to or that you live in. We need to be having those conversations with everybody. Nothing changes if we don't talk to each other. We have to be talking to one another. And those of us that have the knowledge need to be having the conversation with those that don't. And be willing to field questions and be willing to face pushback. That's what we have to do. Be willing to face the pushback, but be willing to have the hard conversations. And understand that it's going to cost you friends. It's going to cost you family. It's going to cost you coworkers. And it's going to cost you respect. But somewhere out there, you will find someone that you impact, even if it's one person. So you folks, get out there, buy Cristi's book. Let me know that you bought it. And head over to my Subscribe Star and pick a level of support. Everything is appreciated. And to all of those who already support me, to the people that make my merchandise, buy the merchandise, people who send money to Subscribe Star, to my friends at Arden Sales Group here in Minnesota, thank you for the support. Thank you for the time. And as always, as I like to end every one of my shows, until next time, my friends, fight for your freedom. It belongs to you. Fight for your liberty. It is yours. And Sic Semper Tyrannis.
We are go for liftoff in T-minus 30.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark.
All systems are a go. All systems are a go.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at will.